There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
It's always a special treat to welcome a brand new guest to Bite Size Book Chats. This is Marina from the UK, a wonderful book blogger and bookish presence on Twitter, and here she is for the first time on my channel. Marina, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Sean.
And I think I might have forgotten to say that she's joining us from the UK, and you have lived close to a piece of British literary property that's very important in British literature, don't you?
Yes, that's right. In children's literature, at least. I live in the Thames Valley, close to a small village called Cookham Dean, which was the inspiration for Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame.
And if one goes to that town, is there anything to see? Like, is there a museum or do they make, is there some
No,
bookish
not
tourist stuff?
really. The house is private property. However, Henley also inspired him, and there is Manor House in Henley, which is just a little bit further along on the Thames River, which is supposedly the inspiration for Toad Hall. So Toad of Toad Hall in Wind in the Willows.
And I knew before Marina and I chatted that she is Romanian, but then I found out that it's much more fabulously complicated than that. So I'm going to ask her to tell you guys all the things she told me in one sentence. What a fascinating life you've had.
Yes, so I'm Romanian, but I grew up in Austria, Vienna, and I lived in Romania for a while. Then I studied Japanese, came over to the UK to do my PhD, and have lived also in France and Switzerland and Germany in the meantime.
My goodness. So, and when you say studied Japanese, was that in Japan?
Only summer school, alas. It was in Romania.
Okay, but still, you have to compare notes at some point.
Yeah.
So, as you might be able to predict, Marina is a big reader of translated lit. And in fact, tell us about your blog, Finding Time to Write. Tell us about that.
Yes, so as you might guess from the name, Finding Time to Write, I actually set it up because I wanted to write and I wanted to hold myself accountable for writing something on a regular basis. And it did evolve into more of a book review blog because I do love reading as well. So actually, it's kind of taking me away. So it should really be called now Not Finding Time to Write because I'm doing too much reading.
And you write wonderful book reviews, and that's what has brought us here together today because you recently reviewed a very recent work of, well, even everything is complicated in this conversation because it's not quite an Argentinian novel. You'll explain all that to us, but the author is Argentinian, Margarita García Robayo, The Delivery, from Charco Press, translated from the Spanish by Megan McDowell, and published quite recently, I believe.
Yeah, I think it just came out a couple of months ago.
That's right.
I'm a big fan of Charco Press. I think they're
Yes.
doing some great stuff, and I've loved pretty much all of their books from Latin America. Just small correction, Margarita Garcia Robayo lives in Argentina, but she is actually from Colombia. So
Yep.
that's why she has these contrasts where she compares what
Characters that
Argentinians say and what. Mhm.
Thank you for that important correction. So, tell us about this book? How does it open?
The narrator, who is unnamed, is a young woman who's moved, as I said, from Colombia to Argentina. She still hasn't really unpacked all of the boxes, although she's been living there for a few years now. Her flat is still quite minimalist, shall we say. And she has a sort of lukewarm relationship with her boyfriend. She has a job, sort of copywriting and things like that, that she's not that keen on. She has a bit of sibling rivalry with her sister, and she is quite distanced from her mother. So the mother, clearly there's been something going on with the mother, and she's not talking to her. She's taken her out of her life. And then her sister says, "Oh, I've sent you a parcel." And it takes her a couple of chapters to actually find it. It's a big crate. And when she opens it, it's her mother. So yeah, as you can imagine, it is a bit of magical realism there, but it's an opportunity for her to sort of rethink her past and her relationship with her mother and where it went wrong and who was to blame and all that kind of thing. And so, because she's feeling so stuck in her current life, it sort of enables her to overcome the past, and that enables her to move forward.
Well, I was about to say, I wish I could have seen the narrator's face when she opens the crate, but obviously I can't. But I bet it's wonderfully described in that scene.
Yeah,
She wouldn't have been initially delighted by this delivery.
yeah, exactly.
By the way, I'm going to link in the show notes to Marina's wonderful review, so check that out. In your review, describe this odd sort of passivity that the narrator exhibits.
Yeah, she's a bit of a cold fish in a way. She doesn't seem to feel quite at home in her new country, although she's been living there for a while. She doesn't really get on with her neighbors. She has no real close friends. As I said, everything is sort of lukewarm with her family, with her boyfriend, and she's applying for a writing residency in Europe, and she doesn't even seem to be enthusiastic about that. And she keeps saying that she'll write a novel, but she's not really doing it. So maybe it expresses something that a lot of people of her generation feel. But yeah, I thought it was quite interesting that she was so passive, at least at the start.
And how does the author make her interesting to the reader? Because it sounds like she might be a boring character to read about, but I'm assuming that's not the case. So how does that work?
Well, there is a passage where she says, I'm too prone to introspection. And I think that's something that we can all relate to, when you're sort of punishing yourself and overthinking things and everything around you, you're not quite sure whom to trust. And she still hasn't quite digested things from her childhood, from her youth. So I think we can relate a little bit to that.
Yeah, and if the interior life is richly described, that's interesting. And you said the Spanish title of this novel is even more interesting than the English one. Can you tell us about
Yeah,
that?
so it's called, and I don't speak Spanish, so encomienda or something like that, which means parcel nowadays, but it also refers to a sort of labor system that was set up by the Spanish and allowed them to profit from the labor of the natives. So it's almost like a serfdom, I think, like having
So that,
serfs and making money off them. Mm.
and so I'm imagining there's other stuff going on in the novel that resonates with or shines a light on that makes it more than just a story about a family.
Yes, so it's also possibly the way that although she doesn't go very much in depth into that, but there is this feeling that when you're coming from another country to Argentina, when you're an immigrant, you might be perceived as Argentina almost considers itself the perhaps the best country in South America, and so they perceive her as lesser somehow, and they make slightly fun of her. There is also this precarious job that she has where she's, I think, sort of paid by the hour. She has no insurance, no pension or anything like that, no job certainty. So she's, to all intents and purposes, freelance. And then there is the labor that her mother does. So her mother, who in their childhood never did much for them, never was the kind of mother who would really be nurturing and cooking and looking after the house. Her mother now ends up doing all of this labor, is constantly cooking. When she comes home, she can smell all of the food that her mother has cooked. So there's a lot of kind of unpaid labor or labor that we profit from other people throughout the book.
Sounds fascinating. I read Fish Soup and I liked it. I don't remember very much about it, so it didn't stick with me. You said this is your favorite of the three books that have been translated by Charco Press.
I think with the first two books, because I've read both of them and they were good, they were interesting, but there was a sort of coldness to the narrator, just a coldness in the way they were written. There was also almost like a detachment. And here, although it starts off with a narrator trying to be cold and detached, actually we are taken into her innermost workings, and we get to be pretty close to her, and she's really going through a sort of existential crisis and changing throughout, and I felt that was much more pronounced in this one, and I enjoyed it more.
Marina, thank you for telling us about this book. I hope you'll come back.
I'd love to come back, yes, and let's talk things Japanese.
Absolutely. It's been a long time since Vinny was on my channel. He was on episode 13, and here we are. I think I'm working on episode 69. So, welcome back, Vinny. It's been a while.
Hi, Sean. It's great to be here. Glad to sit down and have this chat with you.
And Vinny, as he was last time, is joining us from West Orange, New Jersey. You have recently read a work of nonfiction. I think it's an essay collection, kind of memoir in the form of essays. You can sort all that out for us, but the title is A Line in the World, A Year on the North Sea Coast by the Danish writer Dorthe Norse, translated from the Danish by Carolyn Wright. Tell us about this book.
Yeah, so this is an essay collection. So it's 14 essays, and it's all about a year that Norse took along the north coast in Denmark. That's the western and the north tip of Denmark. And I believe she was asked to write something that was more conventional, like kind of travel book about it. But she had no interest in doing like just a travel log where there's like a lot of, pictures and things like that. But she kept thinking about it. And it was a place that she grew up living with her family. I'm not sure if she like lived there full time or it was just a vacation spot. So she had some familiarity with it, but it's a very, striking sort of landscape. It is literally like a line in the world. So it kind of, the western coast is kind of, there's this like little line and there's some islands and it's a very beautiful and also like desolate looking area. It doesn't take place like in order of the year or anything like that. It's kind of like, just out of order, just based on the destinations and the spots that she goes to visit. I'm not like a person that really loves like beautiful, like lush descriptions. Like I get kind of easily bored. She's not a writer who does that. She has great descriptions of the landscape, but they're not like lengthy. It's not like she'll just be like, going for a long time on them. So she's able to just really seamlessly weave like some of those descriptions about what she's visiting with a little bit of history, a little bit of the culture, some observations about both what locals and tourists are like, these ancient churches that she visits with a friend in one essay, some of the history of hurricanes and some climate related things, and also reflecting on like the current climate situation and just some about her own personal history growing up on it. And so she's able to take all these things and kind of seamlessly, kind of go from one topic to another, in a pretty impressive way.
So, two questions, rapid fire. Number one, have you been to Denmark? And number two, what drew you to this book in particular?
I've never been to Denmark. What drew me to the book, I've really been enjoying essay collections just in general, which I didn't used to. I'm a really mainly like a fiction reader. It wasn't until I started listening to audiobooks that I listened to more nonfiction.
And so do you recommend doing this on audio? Was it good on audio?
Yes. Yeah, definitely a good one. I'm always like, this is probably not uncommon, but my mind always tends to drift. And so with like essays like this, like that definitely happened. But I would say the mark of like how much I like a book is how much I like go back the 15 seconds, to hear what I just, missed. If I like it a lot, I'm just constantly going back and
Yes.
I think that was true for this one.
I wish I could do that in other areas of my life. Rewind. What did I just miss?
Right. That'd be great.
So
Yeah.
you didn't mention it, so I'm assuming you hadn't read anything else by Dorthe Norse.
I haven't. Nope, this is my first.
No, neither have I. Born in 1970, the first Danish writer to be published in the New Yorker. I believe she writes fairly experimental avant-garde fiction. Did reading this essay collection make you want to go on and try one of her novels or works of fiction?
Yeah, I think it's the kind of just a certain quality of the writing. I think that would do well, fiction or nonfiction wise. So in one of her essays, she visits this old abbey that was built in, I think, 1100. It's called, I think, Borglum Abbey. And it like sits on a hill, and it has this interesting lore that's associated with it. So, and from time to time, she, will talk about like some, history and some even like superstitions and things like that. There's like another essay where there's, I guess this midsummer's festival where people burn like witch effigies.
Yes,
just to give you an idea about. Yeah, and it's interesting because she doesn't give like whole historical details, but she gives you a little bit just to give you a sense of like what she's observing. And so she visits this old abbey, and the lore for this one is actually that it will disappear from time to time, like completely vanish, and you'll just be looking at where it's supposed to be, and it'll be not there. It's apparently linked to like one bishop that was, I guess, a little bit of a bad guy for reasons that it didn't really go into in the essay. A friend of hers who's a poet, and he actually has had the experience where he had gone to the abbey with his wife like many times, and then they went one time, the same place they always went, and it just wasn't there.
I'm not much of an essay reader, but this one sounds good. It might be an interesting way to start with Dorthe Norse. Yeah. So thank you for telling us about this book, Vinny.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was great to be here.
How lovely to have Sisilia from Singapore back. Hello, Sisilia.
Hey, hello, Sean. It's good to be here again.
And that cafe is rather empty. Did you make a reservation for the whole cafe?
Yes.
Sisilia has the fabulous background. It looked so real.
Yes. I keep changing my Zoom background just for fun.
I'm expecting the server to come and give you another cup of tea or something. We're here to talk about a new to me anyway, NYRB book called Blood by Louis Guilloux, and it's translated from the French by Laura Marris. I've never heard of this author or this book. It's got a fabulous cover, and you quite liked it. Please tell us about it, Sisilia.
Yeah, I love it. I'm actually really glad to find this book. That's what I really appreciate from NYRB Classics for publishing this book. Actually, this is a second translation, and that's what this publisher does all the time, finding a new translation and publish it. This book is actually a tragicomic set in World War One, but there is no war action, so that is really interesting. It's set on a single day in year 1917 at the French provincial town, and it's talking about how the whole French society deal with the war, and it's focusing on one person. It's called Creepier. Creepier is a nickname, and it's very funny. He is a philosophy teacher, and Creepier stands for Critic of Pure Reason. Isn't it interesting? Yeah, so this book actually is not only focused on one person. Started with a lot of names, and I got confused. I got lost in it with too many characters with a funny French names. But towards probably a quarter in, and I got familiar with each of the characters. So we got a glimpse of each character, each person. What's the background? What's the intention? What is the reaction to the war, and how they actually deal and see the war? I think that is a pretty amazing work by Louis Guilloux. And the other thing is Creepier is a very interesting character. He is kind of like a depressed person. He lost his wife. So it's at the start of the book, it started with a statement that he lost his wife. The wife cheated on him, and they got divorced, and he just couldn't let go. the whole life he's just like thinking about, oh, my past with a wife, my regret, about maybe not having a very good relationship, why he let the affair happen and the divorce. The philosophical part is basically about him hating humanity, because he saw like how the world war is affecting the society, and a lot of negative thoughts about the current world.
I have many questions, or I at least have a few questions, Sisilia.
Sure.
I don't like philosophy, so will this book turn me off? Is there a lot of philosophy in it?
No, the philosophy is like just nicely inserted into the conversation and the situation. So that's actually giving an insight on why the society behave that way and how they are reacting to the war. And one part that is interesting is this was World War One, so it seems like people didn't know how to react to it because it's something new, right? So the loss of the children who went to fight for the war, that's definitely giving a lot of trauma. But there's a sense of a war mockery over there too. Yeah, it's like, for example, there's a person who's suggesting, oh, okay, let's, use the cannon as a decoration. Let's create a war museum. And then parents like forcing the son to wear a uniform. The son just came back from the war and got injured. So there's a lot of trauma there. And then he was forced to wear a uniform to the party. So that, the significance of the war is a bit weird.
It's controversial.
There.
It's being debated in the novel.
Yes.
The synopsis says that there's some political protest. Yeah.
Yes. And I think that is the best scene in this novel. I quite enjoyed that scene.
Would you describe this as an anti-war novel?
I think so.
Okay. And would you describe it as more of a character-driven novel, or is there quite a bit of plot?
It's definitely character-driven. It's just like a day in the life of the whole society. What amazed me is actually that this book was published in 1935, but it's read like a 19th century novel.
And that was a good thing?
I think it's a good thing. When I read this, I thought, oh, okay, I got a taste of Zola a little bit here, or a little bit of a George Gissing there.
Okay, well, that's very interesting.
That's really interesting. And the author actually was born in 1899. So he's, the unlucky generation, right? Who got to experience the war twice. I like that he put a lot of references to his favorite authors, Dostoevsky, Flaubert. Yeah, so it's very interesting to find a phrase or two that is reference to Madame Bovary, for example. I think what I like the most about this is how he mixed the tragedy with humor in the whole novel, and then the style of his writing as well. I must say that this book is pretty heavy. It's not an easy read. And it's not for an uplifting mood kind of book, but it's totally worth the investment of time and effort.
Thank you for telling us about this book.
Thank you.
I would like to welcome for his debut appearance on my channel another tuber who I just met a few minutes ago for the first time on Zoom, and that is Aaron from London, and of the fabulous BookTube channel. Aaron read a book. Aaron read a book. Welcome, Aaron.
Hello, Sean. Hello. Nice to be on.
Great to have
strange
you here.
So, someone else do the catchphrase.
Yeah, so let's start with that. Why do you pronounce it both ways? At the beginning of every video, you say Aaron read I don't know which one you say first, but Aaron read a book, Aaron read a book. Tell us what that's about. That's kind of catchy.
It started with that as just a temporary channel name, and then it became a bit of a catchphrase because when I was commenting on other people's live streams and things, they would pronounce it in different ways, and then I realized that it has two meanings. And I do sort of talk about books I've read and books I want to read. So, it's sort of a call to
Absolutely.
action, read a book.
And my thought about Aaron read a book is that it's a motivator. It's like
Mm,
doing your channel motivates you to read more. And it's kind of, Aaron, read a book.
yeah, that is it.
So tell us what you do over on your YouTube channel, kind of stuff you read and so on.
I've been going on my channel for about 6 months, but I've been commenting and watching YouTube for 4 or 5 years now. So I had existing people I knew on BookTube urging me to make a channel like Kelly from Books I'm Not Reading. I tend to be very eclectic on my channel. So my first loves are science fiction and fantasy, but I do love sort of Victorian novels and what I like to call my old ladies as well. Like I was saying before we started recording, you introduced me to Barbara Pym. Barbara Pym's one of my favourites. Muriel Spark, Nancy Mitford. I love all these sort of old English authors.
Well, there is a big
So I like,
overlap in our Venn diagram for sure. What was that last name? You said three names. It was Barbara Pym, Eurospark, and then Nancy. I didn't catch that one.
Nancy Mitford.
Nancy Mitford. The Mitford sisters are fascinating.
Mm.
I've only read one of I think it's Nancy Mitford's novels that I really enjoyed.
He has that same kind of acerbic wit as Muriel Spark. I find like a bit catty that I like.
So we're here to talk about a book that Aaron has recently read and loved that sounded pretty darned interesting to me. It is a book about reading. It is called Dear Reader, The Comfort and Joy of Books by the British writer Cathy Rentzenbrink. Tell us about this book, Aaron.
Yeah, so I heard about this on BookTube, and it was kind of a throwaway comment by Alice on the Giant Bookshelf. She was doing a TBR and talking about a newer book that Cathy Rentzenbrink had written, and she mentioned that this was her favorite book about reading or a book about books. It's sort of a memoir, really, her life in books, both as a reader and a bookseller. So she works for Waterstones, and it kind of goes up to the point where she herself became an author. And so it's largely through her childhood and early career. So this is one thing I really liked and relate to about the book is she was a sort of low down employee in the bookshop. So not a manager or anything, just working on the till shelf stacking, well into her 30s, which I kind of find refreshing because she's working class as well. So
I'm going to link to your video where you talk about the book, and I would say it's a book review video. You go on to talk about other books that were inspired from this. Put a link to that in the show notes. I am over this, but for many years, I had a kind of an allergy to picking up these kind of books about reading or books about books, because it's like, I already know I like reading. I already know I like books. Why would I read a book about reading? I'd rather read a book. So what would you say to that? I don't have that prejudice anymore, but
well, I sort of see your point. I don't think I've read many others, to be honest. I think it has to have another element to it, doesn't it? So she has the element of her life in it as well. So there's stuff about her brother tragically dies very young, and her first book is about grief and overcoming grief.
that's right.
And there's that element to how it sort of changed her life. And there's also later in her career, before she's an author, she starts doing stuff for Waterstones where she's talking to prisoners and stuff and trying to get them into reading. And she gets her dad, who's a tin miner, into reading as well. So it's a lot about talking about books as well.
Yeah, and I cured my prejudice or overcame my allergy by reading one of Edmund White's memoirs about reading, The Unpunished Vice, A Life of Reading, and I loved it. I fell deeply into it, and like you with this book, I crafted a reading list from it. I think reading a book about how much other writers and readers love books and reading it's a special kind of company that we keep. Because I mean, reading is obviously a solitary activity, and there's something really companionate about reading the musings of somebody who loves reading as much, if not more, than you do. So this one sounds interesting. Would you say that it's a mixture of memoir and what? Essay? I mean, how much of it is more general and how much of it is about her life?
It's quite short, so it's not a great deal more. There are parts of it where every sort of 3 or 4 chapters she will just do a section which is called books about fictional diaries, and then she will just describe sort of
Yeah.
books. So it's the closest thing to a booktube channel I've ever seen in a book. So that I
In
think
book
that's why I
form?
liked it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the whole time I was just thinking she should be on booktube.
Well, I do see she has some videos on YouTube about some of her other books, so I don't know if I didn't see one about this book.
It's very well written, very beautiful writing.
So, Aaron, thanks for introducing us to the book. Will you come back?
Yeah, anytime.